بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم نويت تعلم وتعليم وتذكر والتذكير ونفي إفادة استفادة وحتى تمس بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم ودعاء إلى هدى ودلالة على خير ابتغاء وجه وطاعته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى اللهم علمنا بما ينفعنا وينفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallahu khairan for joining us again as we are continuing in our look at those things that tend to soften the heart. And so, inshallah ta'ala, what I wanted to do was actually talk about something that for many of us we don't necessarily like to talk about, something that we often shy away from, but it probably is the greatest softener of the heart that we can ever experience. And that is the reality of our ultimate reality, which is death. And the reason why I want to discuss it is because I was actually just earlier talking with my family, and my oldest son, he's 10 years old. So we were actually talking about the aspect of death and trials and tribulations. And I was reminding him of a narration of the Prophet ﷺ, and so in this narration, the Prophet ﷺ, what does he say? And again, many of us are probably familiar with this. Many of us are probably familiar with this hadith. It's related in multiple different books of hadith. So, for example, Imam Al-Nawawi puts it in his Riyadh al-Salihin, that he takes from Imam Al-Tirmidhi, as well as Nisa'i and Ibn Majah. So these are all the major books of hadith, in which the Messenger of Allah he says, أكثروا ذكر هذه اللذات. And so he says, remember often, أكثروا ذكر هذا من اللذات, the destroyer of things that we find pleasurable. And anyone that's familiar with the Arabic language, does anyone know what ladith means in Arabic? The term ladith? Just asking. Okay. Yeah. So I don't know if that's Sister Mina or someone else. It just says admin. But the meaning of ladith, one of the meanings is something that is delicious. And so this aspect of those things that we find pleasurable, those things that we find delicious, one of the greatest things that we typically enjoy in this world is food, especially as Muslims. I remember one of my teachers, he had mentioned, he said that, Muslims will say, like, we don't smoke, we don't drink, but boy, can we eat. So, and And even kind of reflecting upon, as we somewhat did earlier in our discussions, even reflecting upon the aspect of how we eat. If I could recommend a non-religious book for everyone that I'm currently myself reading, and I'm finding it very fascinating on many different types of levels. And actually, this was a book that was recommended to me by one of my teachers from an Islamic perspective, even though this is not an Islamic book, but the book is actually called Anti-Cancer. And so some of the things that's actually mentioned in the book is kind of like the dangers and the pitfalls that we put ourselves in from the things that we normatively eat as Westerners, and in particular in Canada and America, is that we have some of the highest rates of cancer comparative to other places. And so it's not lost that a major component of why we suffer so much more from cancer than other places is based upon the horrible diet that we have as Westerners. Because they have done studies where they've taken people who are from areas that have low rates of cancer, and they've moved to Western places, and those same people eventually kind of fall in line into the high percentages of cancer within. So, like, basically, what the study has shown is that even more so than genetics, our lifestyle of eating and the like. Thank you. For those who are on Zoom, the link has just been put into the chat for the work. But it's a very beneficial book. But the whole aspect of the remembrance of death is the aspect of it actually helps to remember life. And the reason why that is that when a person is placed into a situation where death is like staring you in the face, because as I was mentioning, as I was talking to my son, is that if we were to use the analogy of death kind of being like someone being on the East Coast, whether that's New York, New Jersey, that's just because the Mecca Center was initially in New York. Let's just use New York. So say, for example, that we were all starting in New York and ultimately we were traveling to California. The reality of it is that we may all have different ways of getting to California. Some of us may walk, some of us may fly, some of us may take a train, some of us may drive, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, all of us are going to California. And depending on the mode of transportation that we take, then that's going to determine how short or fast that we're going to get there. But at the end of the day, we're all going to that same destination. And so for many of us, if we were to reflect upon death in the same vein, is that we would hopefully start putting things in perspective. Is that if I know that my ultimate destination is going to be California, I'm not going to overly compensate myself in another location. Like, I'm not going to stop in Texas and try to set up residency. I might enjoy the scenery around Texas. I might may take a couple days to look at this side or that side, whatever the case may be, but I'm not going to place my my everything into living in Texas, because I know that ultimately I'm trying to get to California, or that is where my ultimate goal is. Like, my job is not in Texas, my house is not in Texas, my family ultimately is not going to be in Texas. All of that is going to be in California. And so if we have that mindset, then it puts things in perspective. Again, we can enjoy the scenery as we go along the way, but we're not going to allow that scenery to stop us from ultimately getting to where our ultimate home is going to be. And so if you look at the aspect of life and death in that same way, it starts to put things in a greater perspective. That if I know my ultimate destination is death, like, as Allah SWT says in the Quran, "Kullu nafsin dha'iqatul maut," that every soul is going to taste of death. That is the reality. There is no escaping. Like, as much as we may want to try to uh, cheat death, and as much as we may want to say that, oh, well, that's going to happen when I'm at this age or that age, this is part of the reason why the Messenger of Sallallahu also in other ahadith, he said to us that previously I have prevented you from attending the graves, but now go and visit them. And part of that is the aspect of it reminds us the reality of death is that death does not come at a convenient time when we feel that we've accomplished everything. Death comes at any time. You have people in their 20s, people in their 30s, people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. It comes at all different stages. Some of you may know that, for example, I had my second son. He was born in 2017. However, he passed away in 2018. So he was only 2 months old when he passed away. And so the thing is that, he only had 2 months that he was in this world. Other of you've probably had similar experiences where you've had a loved one or someone that may have passed away when they were a young child, a teenager, so on and so forth. I used to work in a hospital as well as a chaplain. And I remember there was a situation where the young man, I think he was around 14 years old, he ended up being hit by a car. And I was the chaplain on call that day, and he ended up dying from getting hit by that car. So up until that point, everything was fine from the standpoint of his family and so on and so forth. They had no health issues, nothing. But then, 14 years old, hit by a car. I was saying to my son, of a family friend of ours, who she had a husband who was a very physically fit individual. He was a person that did martial arts. He was very physically active. He was actually a gym teacher. So that gives you an idea of his commitment to physical fitness and so on and so forth. And he also happened to be a person that liked to ride motorcycles. And so again, that also contributes to this aspect of him being physically fit and active and in a state of what we consider to be general health. And then it happened to be a situation that one time he was out riding his motorcycle and he was hit by a car. And unfortunately, he was not able to recover from that. So he was on life support for some time, but then eventually he has succumbed to that tragic accident. And so he was only in his 30s at that time. And so again, this is just a reminder of this aspect that at the end of the day, death can come at any point in time, meaning that we will ultimately arrive to our destination at any point in time. That at any point in time, death can come, and the only thing that we're going to have is what did we prepare for that meeting? What did we have to prepare for that meeting? Are we prepared to make our graves places of bliss? Or have we made our temporary abode our place of bliss? Like, when a person has a lot of money and they are able to build their own house in this world, what do? They go all out. They want to make sure that the plot of land is right exactly where they want it. They want all these different amenities that they want. They want to speak with the architects to kind of see like, okay, I want the bathroom to look like this and I want this here and so on and so forth. Like they put a lot of effort and a lot of energy into making that. Even if you don't build your home from scratch, you still, like if you purchase a home or you're renting a home, whatever the case may be, you put a good amount to make your home as comfortable as possible. As they say, like, your home is your castle. However, how long are you actually going to live in that house? Like, for example, if I were to ask people, how many people have moved within the last 10 years? Unfortunately for me, I've moved twice in the last 10 years, and I can't stand moving. I'm the only one that's moved in the last 10 years? Wow. May Allah bless you all. Make it easy. Oh, okay. So Sister Jamila, she's moved 3 times. And so the thing is, though, is that anytime that we're in those homes, is that sometimes we don't even expect to move. Like, and we spend our time making our home very okay. So everyone has moved at least twice. So so many of us have experienced this aspect of like trying to make our home comfortable, but then having to up and move. But what is the things that you did while you were in those homes to try to make them comfortable? And what are the efforts and the money that you spent and so on and so forth building up that home? Is that oftentimes you put in a great deal of work. And so similarly, the way that you try to make that home comfortable should also be the way that you make your next life comfortable. Meaning that your focus should actually be even more so on making your barzakh comfortable. Why? Because the barzakh, so for example, let's say that the person finally gets their dream home, dream location, dream job, everything is just working out. So they don't have to go anywhere. And let's just say that this person lives to be 90 years old. Like, let's just go for a long period of time. And so they lived in that house for, let's say, 60 years. Currently, from our understanding of the world right now, and so on and so forth, is it more feasible that that person, once they die at 90, is it more feasible to think that they will be in their graves for longer or in that beautiful home that they were so proud of longer, even if they lived in it for 60 years? And for the most part, the answer is going to be what? Is that for many of us, is that the time that we're going to spend in the grave, and more than likely the case, is going to be significantly much longer. That Allah knows best when the end of time is going to be, when the last day is going to be. But for many people, the time that they spend in their grave is going to be even much longer than whatever time that you spend living in your dream home. But again, going back to the other concept that I mentioned before, is that the aspect of remembering death, it also causes you to live in a better way. Why? Because now things start to be placed into perspective. Like, for example, if I said to everyone that's online here right now, or even the people that may be watching on YouTube, if I told you for certain, and I'm not talking about a doctor's estimation, I'm not talking about what statistics have said about a person in your exact type of social, economical, health situation, but if I told you for certain, you're going to die tomorrow, or even more, if I said that you're going to die next week, what would then be important to you? Now, this is not something that I'm looking for people to write in the chat or to comment on or something, whatever the case may be, but it's something to reflect upon. Because whatever you say that is going to be actually important to you, if you were to know that you only had a week to live, that is going to give you indication of where you stand in terms of your relationship with Allah and your relationship with the Akhirah. So meaning that if I told you that you only had a week, or you only had a day, or you only had a couple hours, whatever the case may be, and your primary concern would be, okay, let me get myself straight with Allah. Like, let me make sure that my debts are paid off. Let me make sure that I make up whatever fast I have to make up, or I make up any prayers that I have to make up, or whatever. Like, if these become your priority, like these are the things that you start thinking about, then the question becomes, why hasn't that already been the priority? Because even though I'm just hypothetically saying that, what if I told you that you were going to die tomorrow or next week? There's nothing to say that that won't happen. And I'm not wishing death upon any one of us here. May Allah grant us all long lives. But this aspect of remembering death so that we can actually appreciate what are those things that are most important to us in this life. That for many of us, not only would it be the aspect of the preparation for meeting Allah, but also be the aspect of the relationships that we have. That, some of the, especially like, for example, situations with spouses, is that some of the arguments or some of the pet peeves of spouses and so on and so forth, when you place death in the mix, all of a sudden those things are no longer as important. Like, whatever, uh, 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 whatever situation that may be causing arguments between a husband and wife and so on and so forth. Oftentimes if you place death in the mix where like one of the spouses has like a terminal illness, and I greatly appreciate one of my professors, Dr. Bazzi, or Professor Bazzi. We did a course with her on death and bereavement, and of the many things that she taught us, and many of my classmates we all had said that she had one of the best class, if not the best class that we had ever taken within the program that we were doing. One of the things that she had said was about the aspect, even the term terminal illness, that she said that she doesn't like using that term, in particular because from her perspective, she's looking at it from the standpoint of our ultimate reality is that every one of us is terminal. If you want to know the proof for that, just look in the Quran. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says? كُلُّكُم مَيِّتُونَ, all of you are dying. What does it mean to be terminal? From a medical perspective, they probably say like, terminal is a person having a condition where their life expectancy is only supposed to be within like 6 months to a year, whatever the medical jargon would be for a terminal illness. But the reality of it is that every single one of us is terminal. None of us can guarantee that we'll be here 5 minutes from now. So we're all terminal. But when you have like an actual disease that they're considering to be terminal and so on and so forth, such that it becomes a greater reality for many people, then you start to see that, some of these things that you were so worried and concerned about, they become minuscule. They're not all that important. What becomes important? What is my relationship with this person? What is my relationship with that person? What are the things that we can do together in the limited amount of time that we have? And the thing is that, again, going back to this concept of it helps us to live life better, is that it's one of the things that he actually mentions in that book, Anti-Cancer. And he's not coming from a religious perspective, but it's this aspect that many people, the reason why they fear death, even if they don't believe in an afterlife, is because they fear that they're going to be missing out, that there are things that they wanted to do that they're not going to be able to do, it, things they want to accomplish that they're not going to be able to accomplish, that they haven't fulfilled their mission or whatever case may be. And so part of the things is what he said is that even if you're diagnosed with a terminal illness, for example, that what is stopping you from actually doing those things or taking advantage of whatever that you can do within that time frame? Because the reality of it is that all of us have a limited amount of time. None of us are going to live forever. And so, starting to have this mindset of, okay, my ultimate destination is not this life. My ultimate destination is the grave and ultimately the akhirah. What am I preparing for that? And while I'm here in this world, what really matters to me before I end up going to my grave? And trying to see, okay, what is the most pertinent things to me, and taking advantage of those things. Because once death comes, as I think we mentioned earlier before, is that the angel of death, he's no longer coming to anyone and asking them to take their souls. The only exception to that is going to possibly be Isa alayhi salam, because Isa alayhi salam will come back towards the end of time and he'll die a natural death. However, outside of the prophets, none of us get asked by the angel of death. He just takes. So we're not going to have an opportunity to say, wait, hold, I'm not yet, I want to go back and I want to do this. No. When that time comes, that's it. I didn't realize until I worked into the hospital how many car accidents there are on a regular basis. And I remember when I first started, because first I did an internship in terms of what they call CPE, clinical pastoral education, where this is basically you pay them to have you work. It sounds kind of interesting, but it's a part of the divinity training. But in any case, I remember when I first started working there, my supervisor, because you have to have regular, basically therapy sessions with your supervisor. One of the things that she mentioned, because I was in a level 1 trauma hospital, one of the things that she mentioned, she said that it's not a matter of if, it's only a matter of when. And she was talking about dealing with death situations. Meaning she was saying that at some point in time, she couldn't specifically say when it was going to be, but she was saying that at some point in time you're going to experience a death situation. And the thing is that after being at that hospital for a number of years working with them, I don't know how many situations of death that I've seen. But I remember, like I said, I had the one. Wait, I'm in a class right now. I had the one situation where you had the young man that I told you about, the 14-year-old who got hit by, that was hit on a bike. You had there was another situation in which a wife, her husband had gone out to work, and he had been hit by a car while he was going through work, and he had died, and she had to find out at the hospital. There was another case where there was another young woman um, who was in a car accident, and she passed away. And like these are just three that are just readily coming to my mind of situations of people. And all of these people are of various ages. The 14-year-old, he sticks in my mind even more so because of his age. But the young woman, she was only in her 20s, if I remember correctly. And then the man whose wife ended up coming to the hospital, I think he was probably in his 40s maybe, or something of that nature. And so again, this is a situation where we don't know when this is going to happen. And so making sure that we're in a situation of preparing ourselves for that time, and also taking advantage of the life that we have now to not fret about the things. As one of my teachers would say, if it's not going to matter to you in your grave, then check it. Don't stress about it. Don't worry about it. Like, the the little tidbits that you have between your, and again, I keep mentioning the aspect of spouses, but even like little arguments that you have with your siblings, or different disputes that you may have had, especially with parents or anything like that. Like, look, if these are not going to be matters that are going to matter in your grave, then just let it go. Enjoy the life that you have here in a manner pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that you can arrive to your grave in a safe space, so that you can be comfortable whenever death comes. And so this was a situation in which one of the ulama, he had mentioned, he had said that if I were to be told that I was going to die tomorrow, I wouldn't change anything. And the reason why he said that, he wasn't coming from a standpoint of arrogance, but rather he was saying that every day he lived as if he was going to die tomorrow, because he understood this reality and he acted upon it. That if I die today, tomorrow, next week, I'm preparing for that time when I'm going to ultimately leave this world. And so this is where we want to get to. And again, this is of the greatest of the softenings of the heart. Why? Because it starts to put the dunya in perspective. Like I forget exactly where I was reading it. It might even been in that anti-cancer book, because I've been reading that quite extensively. But it was mentioning how for many of us, and I've mentioned this example before, but how for many of us, even the aspect of the way that we live our lives. Actually, no, this was from an article that I read from one of my teachers. But in any case, this aspect of how many of us live our lives in terms of like the dopamine rushes, and in particular when it comes to buying things, is that, many of us, we have shopping addictions. And the shopping addictions is actually an actual addiction to shopping in and of itself. Like, meaning that it's not even to a gathering of the things, but it's actually just to the shopping. And that they actually done research on people's minds, and there's actually a release of dopamine when people look at a product and then are able to actually purchase it, which is not anywhere near as much as when they actually receive that product. And just think about it for your own standpoint. How many of us have purchased something or been looking at something, been researching it, looking at it? We finally saved up to get as much as money that we need to get it, or we finally convinced our spouse, so let us just go ahead and put it on the credit card and we'll figure out how we're going to pay for it, and so on and so forth. Purchase it. we get the tracking number. We might be even checking the emails like every hour just to see, okay, did it ship yet? Did it ship yet? Did it ship yet? Then we get the tracking, and then we find the tracking number comes, and then we click on it, and then we see, oh, it's not updated yet. And so now we're, clicking on that, refreshing it every 2-3 hours or whatever case may be to see if they finally gave us an estimated delivery date. And then we're looking at the tracking and waiting for that day to come, looking at the tracking again, see if maybe the date moved up, maybe. And then finally we see that sign that says out for delivery, and we're so happy, and so on and so forth. We finally get the thing. And in some instances, we don't even open up the box. Why? Because we were just so excited about the aspect of having something new. Or if we do open up the box, we never even use the thing. Or if we use it once or twice, and then it just sits somewhere, and we have to even think about, oh wait, where is that thing at again? Or you do like the fakir here, and you purchase something, and then some months go by, and you end up wanting that same thing and forgetting that you even purchased it previously, and either end up purchasing it again and to later end up finding it later on, like, dang it, I already had this thing. Or with the help of like Amazon, you end up trying to go to purchase it, and then it just shows in your order history, oh yeah, you already purchased this on such and such a date. Like, oh yeah, that's right. But then the question becomes, do we really need those things? Like, did we even really need that thing in the first place? So again, this aspect of reflecting on death is an aspect of putting life in perspective. Like, what do we really need? That's why the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu he says in hadith that's mentioned in Tirmidhi, is that if you wake up in the morning and you have a sense of security, a place to rest your head, meaning you have a home, and you have food to eat, is as if you've been given the dunya and everything in it.
But what about toys? What about kids? What about this and
Because at the end of the day, how much else do you need? We've all been seeing the things that have been going on overseas, like the things that have been going on in Philistine. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, raise them in darajat, because I can't imagine what it is to live in that type of situation. But what do we really need? If we have a sense of security, a sense of a home to be safe in, and food to eat,
and water.
How much more do you actually need? Because at the end of the day, all the things that we save up, they're not going to go with us. Our graves are not going to be filled with our wardrobe and our cars and so on and so forth. And so may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be those who truly reflect upon death and live life in a manner that is fulfilling, so that whenever death comes, whether we consider it to be quick or long, and generally speaking, no matter how long you live, you're always going to consider it to be quick. But even still, is that no matter when death comes, whether we're in our 20s, our 30s, our 40s, our 50s, is that inshallah we're prepared to meet our Lord. And I'll end with this before I go to the question that I've seen in the chat. I haven't ignored it, but inshallah I'm going to come back around to it. But I'll end with this. And many of you have heard me mention this before, but I've just been kind of like enamored by all of its realities. Is that when the Prophet, and this is a hadith that's sahih, it's related in the Sahih of Imam Al-Bukhari, where on the deathbed of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his daughter Fatima was with him. And Aisha radiallahu anha, who's narrating this hadith, she mentions that I was looking from a distance into the room so that I could see Fatima holding her father, meaning the Messenger of Allah, and the Messenger of Allah, he whispered something into the ear of Fatima. And when he whispered that thing, Fatima started to cry. And then she continues, she said that after that, the Prophet ﷺ, he whispered something else into her ear, and then she became happy. She started to smile. And Aisha radiallahu anha, she mentions that she was too shy to ask Fatima at that moment. She didn't feel that it was appropriate to ask, because this was a very intimate moment between a daughter and her father. So she didn't feel that it was appropriate to ask her what had taken place at that moment. But after the Prophet ﷺ had passed away, Aisha finally had the courage, or felt that it was appropriate, to ask, what the Prophet had told her that first made her cry and then made her smile. And so Fatima had explained to her, she had said that the first thing he said to me that made me cry was that he told me that he was going to be leaving this world, that he told me that I'm getting ready to die. But then she said, the second thing that he said to me that made me smile, that made me become happy, was that he told me that I was going to be the first of his family to join him in death. And I remember in certain instances when I tell this story, it depends like whether I want to like really be more serious about it or kind of more not necessarily jokingly about it, but like a little bit more lighthearted with it. But like in certain situations I've said like, how many of us, if we had a close family member, let's say that is a parent, if we've all had good relationship with our parents, and if we don't have good relationships with our parents, then someone that you have is someone who's an elder to you that you have a strong love and attachment for, and that you were there with them on their deathbed, and they told you that they were getting ready to die. But then they said to you, as a means of trying to comfort you, that you're going to be the first of their family to join them. How many of us would be kind of like, even if we didn't necessarily say it out loud, but we think in the back of our head, like, wait, what, not me? Like, wait, hold up. Like, I'm gonna miss you, but I don't want to go yet. Like, you mean like 20, 30 years? Like, all of us are going to have long lives. And then after 20, 30 years, I'm going to be the first, or like, what you mean? I'm going to be for many of us, like that would not be a form of comfort. But the Prophet Muhammad SAW, look how he raised his daughter. Because the other context of this is that what? Fatima, how old was Fatima at this time? Fatima was in her 20s. She was a young woman. Not only that, but Fatima also had two sons at this particular time. She had Hassan and Hussein, and they were little kids. How many mothers do we have right here? How many mothers, would want to necessarily or be happy about being separated from their children in their young youth age, like as they're still growing up, they haven't even necessarily reached puberty yet. But look at the way that Fatima was, that her love for Allah and her father, meaning the Messenger of Allah, made it such that the aspect of being separated from them and having to remain in this dunya was completely, a sense of grief greater than being, having to be separated from her children, her husband, or anything else that would remain in the dunya. That she would much rather be with Allah and His Messenger in the grave than to still even remain back with her children. And so that is where we want to come to. That is not to say that we don't love our children. It's not to say that we don't love our spouses, but it's that aspect that Allah SWT mentions in Surah At-Tawbah, that none of those things should be more beloved to us than Allah and His Messenger and striving in His cause. That our longest longing hope should be to be with the Messenger of Allah, to be with Allah SWT, and in extension, the Messenger of Allah. So I know that there was strange that old fellows still reject Islam after being told that they will go to hell if they don't accept Islam. So the thing is that why do people reject? Well, the thing is that for many people, it's not even necessarily a full rejection of Islam, it's a rejection of organized religion. So I always am of the opinion that I can understand a person that doesn't believe in organized religion. I don't understand a person that doesn't believe in God in and of himself. So for many people, because of the atrocities that people have done in the name of organized religion, and because of how many different batil, false religions there are that are out there, and also the manipulations that people use with religion, many people just have a negative connotation towards religion as well. And then in extension to that, with the advancement of science, at least in our times, where we're able to scientifically, through the scientific method, explain certain things that people used to attribute just to religion. So for example, why does thunder sound? That used to be, in some cultures, that used to be the aspect, like, that was a battle between the gods and so on and so forth. But now we understand that, this is the coming together of two clouds, one being hot, one being cold, and so on and so forth. And so for some people, that is their concept, is that, well, everything eventually can be scientifically explained. If we don't know what that scientific explanation is, it'll just come sometime later in the future. And so people just feel there's no need for organized religion. They just feel that it's something that people use to try to control and manipulate people. And so this is why, for example, one of our teachers, he has the Why Islam is True series to allow for people first to understand why there has to be a necessary being, meaning God. And then once we establish that, then showing why Islam is the actual true religion and why other religions are necessarily false. But the thing is that many people aren't necessarily going to go through that process of trying to figure it out per se. So this is why you can have situations like that. Is quick death is better? In this case, plane crash and car accident are considered good death. So the thing is that a good death is that you die in a state where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with you. So the thing is that we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for afiyah, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for well-being. So, we don't ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to let me have a slow, painful, torturous death. Like, I don't think anyone would necessarily ask for something like that. So we ask for well-being, like, we ask for ease, even with the aspect of death, because death in and of itself has its own difficulties and hardships. If you want to really think about that, I think you guys know by now that I'm always a big a big promoter of Imam Ghazali's Ihya al-Madin. But if you want to really look at the aspects of death, Imam Ghazali has a section of his Ihya that's been translating on the remembrance of death and the afterlife. So if you read that, Imam Ghazali, he talks about the difficulties that are in death in and of itself, no matter what type of death you have, whether it's a quick death or like you have like a long, extended, drawn out death. But the thing is that what you want to do is that you want to live your life such that whenever death does come, is that it's as easy as possible. And part of the way that you make it easy is that you remove your heart from being connected to the dunya. Because one of the major ways that death becomes even more painful and more difficult is that not only is the angel of death taking our souls out of our bodies, but our hearts are trying to hold on to this world. So it makes it more difficult for our bodies to be removed from our souls. And so the more that a person's heart is connected to this world, the more difficult it's going to be for us when our souls are taken from our bodies. So the best way of trying to combat that is to, as much as possible, remove the connection to the dunya from the heart. And so this is why you see that the true awliya, they don't have any concern really for the aspects of this dunya. Like if they have it, okay, fine, I'll just use it in a way that's pleasing to Allah. But if they don't have it, they're perfectly fine. They're perfectly healthy. That, as for many of us, if we don't have, a certain amount of zeros in our account, we're just kind of like, oh my God, like, what am I going to do? So on and so forth, if my car is not the latest version or something like that, oh my God, the neighbors, they just got the new, whatever car, and my car is already 5 years old, I need to get a new one, and so on. So we get so caught up in the dunya, but the aspect of it is that, what does that really matter? And the more that we can recognize within ourselves that we have this strong connection to the dunya, that we always want the new thing, or we're always finding ourselves window shopping, or whatever the case may be, that is to show us that our hearts are connected to the dunya. And so in order to better prepare ourselves for the akhirah, try to remove that connection to the dunya, so that no matter what way death may come to us, because it could be a situation that a person may outwardly have a very gruesome type of death, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could facilitate for that person to not really feel much of anything when death actually comes to them. Or that a person could be in a state of bliss as death is coming to them, even though outwardly, from our dunyawi perspective, it looks like a very hard and difficult death, or whatever the case may be. But again, at the same time, we don't ask for hardship or difficulty. Like, I've worked in a hospital. I've seen people who were in what I would imagine to be very hard and difficult circumstances, and painful illnesses and so on and so forth. And it's not something that you will wish for or want to be the case. But again, the better aspect of the quality of death is based upon how much are you connected to the dunya or not. The less you're connected to the dunya, the easier death will be for you. The more you're connected to the dunya, the harder death will be for you, no matter what. Even if you instantly died from a bullet, for example, that wouldn't mean anything if your heart is connected to this dunya, because it's still going to be a matter of ripping your soul, from the body. Whereas for the believer, the one that is anxious to meet their Lord, the one that's anxious to return to their Lord, their body will easily be removed from their soul will be easily removed from their body. This is like the likeness of Bilal ibn Rabah, that they mentioned that when Bilal ibn Rabah was finally on his deathbed, he was finally getting ready to die. His wife was, lamenting that her husband was close to death. She said, basically saying like, oh, what a horrible time this is. And Bilal only responded by saying, what a beautiful time this is. Tomorrow I get to be with my beloved. He was meaning that he was going to be returned to the barzakh, and he was going to be able to be with the Messenger of Allah sallallahu again. And again, ultimately, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, when you see the two different perspectives of, death, like, the wife is looking at it from the standpoint of the dunya, I'm being separated from my husband, I'm being separated from a loved one. Bilal's looking at it from the standpoint of, alhamdulillah, I get to be with my true beloved. Like, yes, I love my family. Yes, I love you, my wife, but my true beloved is Allah and His Messenger. And now I get to be with them again. And again, the emphasis is more with the Messenger of Allah. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's not bound by life, death, time, distance, or anything like that. So you can always be with Allah. But from the standpoint of Bilal, is that now he's going to be in the same realm as the Messenger of Allah again, the barzakh, which is his own reality in of itself. And so, again, we ask for a good ending, but part of having a good ending is having a good life. And a part of having a good life is having a good life based upon the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said it. And so this is why we find our Muslims permitted to get assisted suicide? No. Having assisted suicide is not permissible. We can seek out, different means of trying to ease difficulties that we might be facing, but suicide is something to be completely haram in Islam. And, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu, he's mentioned specifically in different narrations the dangers of people commit suicide, because essentially suicide in Islam is the same as murder. Suicide in Islam is murdering oneself. So murder is haram. Murder is impermissible. So suicide is the murder of one's own self. And so just like to murder another person is not permissible, to murder your own self is also not permissible.
What's suicide?
And so to go to someone to get yes, so that's assisted suicide, and that would not be permissible. Again, we can try to ease the pain for that person. We can try to give them different medications. We can even possibly put them in an extended sleep or something of that nature. But to intentionally take the life of someone that has not been legislated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in particular for very, very specific punishments, and even then is not necessarily going to be implemented, it is not permitted to kill someone, including your own self. And so again, this is why we ask for well-being, so that we don't have difficulties at the time of death and so on and so forth. But to have someone intentionally cause our death, that would not be permitted. As I mentioned, the Prophet ﷺ, he has multiple different hadith where he mentioned the unlawfulness of it. But this also can go into other aspects of suicide, because other things. So during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, people did not necessarily commit suicide, but sometimes what they would do is that, for example, if a person had a strong wound or something like that, they may choose to delay treatment for it, which would ultimately cause them to ultimately die, because the emphasis was to try to die as a shaheed, to try to die as a martyr. And the part of the aspect of dying as a martyr is that essentially you die at the battlefield. You die on the battlefield. Like, you're not brought to another location, or an extended amount of time has not passed from the time that you got that injury inflicted to the time that you died. So you have different stories and different situations of where, like, a person may um, have allowed for themselves to forgo treatment and so on and so forth, but that's because they were willing to go through that in order to hopefully receive shahada. So, like, the example that's usually given is, like, for example, there's a situation where there was multiple soldiers who had all had life-threatening injuries, and the nurses who were attending to them had gone to one and was trying to give him water to drink, to help in his situation. And he had said to the nurse, no, go to my brother. He needs it more than me. So he was, like, delaying himself being treated. And so this happened to all of them, where they would just keep telling the nurses, oh no, just go to the other one. He needs it more than I do. So that by the time that they got back to that first person, he had already passed away. And so that's not considered to be an aspect of suicide. That's an aspect of preference of your brother to yourselves, and then also longing or looking for shahada. But you can't intentionally take your own life. That is, again, the Prophet ﷺ, he has many different hadith that speak about the unlawfulness of it. And so, inshallah ta'ala, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our times from all of us, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to benefit from these last nights and days that we have in Ramadan, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be of those who reflect upon our fleeting reality, such that we take advantage of the times that we have left, such that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not allow us to see another Ramadan, that He makes this the best Ramadan that we've ever had. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. الله سبحانه وتعالى أعلم وحسبنا ونعم الوكيل. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.